Resource for Writers podcast, where each week you get mini craft talks from creative writing teachers and working writers. Head over to resourceforwriters.com, where you can join writing groups, classes, book clubs, and many other events. We hope you like this episode. Welcome to the Resource for Writers podcast. I'm Roxan McDonald.
And I'm Desi Lenc.
And we are
Resource for Writers.
Resource for Writers. All right. I am flustered. So Wednesdays are I finish up 2 days full of teaching. And it's a good thing because I come out of it having just talked about writing for hours and hours on a stretch. But it also is not a good thing because I've just talked about writing for 2 days straight.
Yes. And here we go again.
Here we go again.
So did anything come up in your classes either today or yesterday that?
Yeah. There's a couple things. And the big thing, the reason why I was late today is one big topic, and I'll just talk about that. But then it's a little bit like I teach a month-long workshop on this topic, and people still, we taught it a year ago or more, and it takes soul crushing, ego bashing, to just, as an artist that wants to refine your craft and understand story, it takes shattering your ego and then grappling with books and stories in a way that you never had to do as a reader. And people from that group were like, oh my gosh, this workshop was fantastic. And keep asking, when are you going to do it again? Because they didn't get it. They got it. They got that they knew they needed to get it, but then they don't actually grasp it until you go over it a lot. And so I just want to say that because we are going to do a 30-minute podcast, and there are two things that I got from going to a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at Pacific University, which is the best Pacific is the best MFA in the world.
Shout out.
Yes. But the two things that I feel like I paid for what I pay for my education is the first one is reflective narrator, which we're not going to talk about. But especially if you're writing memoir or first person narratives of any kind, go look up reflective narrator, and we will be offering a workshop on it. And I will talk about this at another point, but probably when I have a faculty with me, because it is so important. It's so important. So we talked a lot about reflective narrator this week. The other thing, and I think the thing that was the biggest learning curve for me, was understanding a through line.
I knew you were going to say that.
Now say it. Well, what were you calling it before?
Throughline.
Because
we want to be thorough, right?
Thorough. Yeah.
In our stories.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues with teaching Throughline is that, so I had 3 faculty that I worked with over 4 semesters. So I worked with one faculty for 2 semesters. Each one had a different take on how to a different language about how to talk about what was missing from my story. And I think one of the issues about why we as the writing community don't understand this thing is because language is not being harnessed here among the community. So we have lots of different words, right? We have and we can't agree on them. So through line is one thing that I think most people will agree is the core of the story. This is what the story is about. But there's also people will just call it the plot, but I don't think so. So I want to say that I will be using words that I have had to work to really refine my definition. And I understand that they're not going to match other people's definition.
Okay.
But me coming to this place where I took terminology and defined it for what I had learned, and started using it very consciously about what I talk about. So throughline is the overarching, this is what we're talking about, but I tend to not even use the term throughline when I teach this, because it mixes so many people up. So the terminology that I use is transformation. What is the transformation of the story? And so story is about change. And I know that it can get like, we can argue about this as people who love books and love short stories and love poems and love all of it, right? But when I finally got this concept, 18 years of me studying writing, trying to write a memoir, it became clear why it has taken so long, because I didn't understand this core facet of storytelling. And as a teacher, it has helped me guide other people to actually finish their stories, to actually have it be in a place that they feel good about. So of course, I don't think I'm the only word on this, but I do feel like I have, through a lot of work, refined some ideas about how to teach and coach writers through this. So transformation being the core of the story is the basics of what I'm talking about. And it seems like when we start to talk about that, it should be a very quick discussion, but it's not. Even this, I went over 15 minutes on my class. We had an extra 30 minutes because writers didn't come today, right? And we went 45 minutes, and we were just getting to the heat of it. So it is a process. Each thing we write, it will be a process of muddling through all of our inspiration, all of our material, all of the things we want and questioning what is the core transformation of this story. And the easiest way to start that journey. Oh, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just had a question. So would you say that this is like the overarching big transformation, but would you say there's little transformations throughout the chapters as well?
Absolutely. And when you start to look at story as transformation, then you start to understand a lot of other stuff that happens in stories. So I say the easiest way to learn is to take the books that you love the best, or short stories that you love the best. And once that you know in and out, that you feel like, we all have them, right? And don't go to your work first, because you're going to be lost. I tried, right? It wasn't until I was in the last semester of my program, and I had talked with several different faculty, not just faculty I was working with. And finally things matched up for me. And then I came home and went through my bookshelf, pulling books, and I had stacks of books all over my house, because I went, oh my gosh, if I could just identify the core transformation and then the other transformations, right? I was mad scientist for weeks. And so, my bookshelf, it's already kind of chaotic, but I pulled them and I would go, I know this book. What is the transformation? And so I can't say favorite book, but it is my longest term love book is Pride and Prejudice. It's like, I go to sleep. When I can't sleep, I turn on Pride and Prejudice. It's like, it will soothe me. If I'm, I've read it too many times. I was a little homeless punk rocker with Pride and Prejudice in my boot. So I know Pride and Prejudice inside, outside. Okay. And I can't believe that I spent my life not understanding that story is about transformation, and then not understanding this one concept, with Pride and Prejudice as being my favorite book, because it's on the fucking cover. I'm sorry. Pride and Prejudice. So if we look at core transformation, two characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Darcy is prideful in the beginning, and by the end, he's less prideful. His entire story is about him grappling with pride and transforming from pride, keeping him from his what he will make him truly happy, and then until he deals with his pride and he becomes less prideful, right? Prejudice. Elizabeth Bennet is prejudiced. She thinks she knows, and every piece of information she gets, she uses it like she knows everything, blah, 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 right? And then the entire story is the buildup of her reliance on prejudice to the breakdown of her prejudice, right? And these pivotal moments, like she's whatever, she thinks Wickham is the best guy ever, right? And that Darcy's the bad guy because Wickham talked trash, right? And then if you have not read Pride and Prejudice and you don't want spoilers, don't listen now here. But when she, refuses Darcy's proposal, and she is self-righteous and she goes, I know who you are, right? And then she gets the letter. And the letter, when he goes, you know what? I think I was a little bit of a jerk in how I asked you. I mean, that was it. He started his process, right? But then he also goes, I used to explain classic literature to like teenagers, and rough teenagers. So I can't help but do my thing where
break it down.
He's like, but you didn't know what you think you knew. That's his thing. Where that letter, right? Where he's like, oh, you think you know? You've just been listening to a trash talking little shit, right? And she has to go, oh, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've been prejudiced against him, right? And then when she goes to Pemberley and then sees how nice that is, right? It's not just that she's not grappling with her capitalism. She's grappling with her prejudice kept her from being at Pemberley, which is an awesome house, but also how he treats everyone around him, right? So she is just wearing away at I built up an entire case about this guy, and that the truth of it is, so I got blinded by my prejudice. That is transformation.
Yes.
All the stuff that happens in between, that's plot, but plot isn't the story. Plot is the stuff that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you start to look at then I had books all over my house where I went wild, right? Cheryl Strayed.
Just like a revelation. You're like, oh my gosh, there's a transformation here. There's a transformation there.
Yeah. And the problem is, so wild, we would look at it. And when we start talking about books as readers, we love subtext, we love theme, we love all that. So we'll be like, this is about grief and drug addiction and promiscuity and right? No, those are just stuff that happen in there. That's absolutely beautiful. But the book is about being self-destructive to less self-destructive. And that story could happen if she went to Vietnam during the war, right? She could start off being self-destructive, and then through the process of whatever plot you put it in, right? She could be in Regency England being self-destructive, and then stuff happens, and then she's less self-destructive. It just happens to be about hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, dealing with grief and dealing,
so these themes aren't necessarily the transformation.
Yeah, the theme is not the transformation. And the reason why I had thought maybe I should take people on for 6 months at a time, because they'll grasp it, and then we go back to our work, and then we get all into theme. And I had this thing where I was had a list of themes, and I was like, these are off limits. Yeah. Good and evil, not there. Grief is not a transformation. Grieving to slightly less grieving, no, right? It's a change, like a character change, So the best way to get to it is to go to lists of character defects, right? Yeah. That's one of the best ways. So then I started pulling books off my shelf, And one of my books, my like permission giver books, like the books that made me think I could tell my story, which I think everyone should have those of, and switch them out like whenever you get excited. So is Angela's Ashes. So it's extremely voice, right? He breaks so many rules. That guy I mean, he was masterful. But are you still there?
I'm still here. I don't know what's going on with my face right now, but I'm frozen in time.
Yeah. So it's fine. At least you look pretty. You know, you've got the serene thing.
I don't look angry like I did last time.
No, last time you looked condemning to me.
I know. You're like, you were trying to talk and you were like, I can't even continue.
You look
right
so
now
judgy.
I know. I feel like you're judging me.
Yeah. No, you don't look judgy. You look serene. Okay.
Angela's
for everybody
Ashes.
who's not watching this on YouTube or wherever, she froze on Zoom. Okay, Angela's Ashes. It's voice-based. He changes tenses. He does all this stuff, right? And it was like, well, maybe because I have as my memoir, I have like a huge story. Like, and I would start to tell people what my book was about, and it would just be this flood of being like Alaskan wilderness and bears and natural disasters and serial killers, and there's a pedophilia ring, and then there's drug addiction, and then there's all this time I did crime, and you know, and then there's a autistic 6'3" clown who gets famous for being nice, and like and a you know, a sociopathic Southern mom who's a redhead who picks people up in honky tonks, and like it turns into this thing, which is my thesis was about how we as memoirists will think we won the lottery because of our material when we have stuff like this, and it's absolutely winning the lottery, but it comes with a curse, and the curse is figuring out the actual story.
Yes, I love that you mentioned that, because as a writer, when people are like, what is your novel about? I'm like, well, there's this, and then there's this that happens, and then we're struggling over here with this, and it's like, I need that elevator pitch, right? That one sentence of what is the transformation. And I think I just need to narrow that down, because I'm always tempted to talk about all the themes within and all the things that happen, you know, the plot and all that.
Yes. That's the reason why those elevator pitch things, like, you know, you can look online and there's these like formulas for being able to talk about your work with publishers and agents and things. But they don't explain it enough to where we as people who love reading, but are now writers, can actually discern within ourselves. Right. Yes. So I just want to say Angela's Ashes, it took me a long time to figure it out, but I was like, this is about self-pity. He is self-pitying in the beginning, and he is less self-pitying in the end. And then there's these other things about identifying the core yearning, and the yearning needs to be in connection with that core transformation. So if he starts off self-pitying and he ends up less self-pitying, that's a good transformation. But if his yearning is that if he wants fish and chips, a self-pitying person can go get fish and chips. So he wants to escape poverty. He wants to have security. And you see throughout the entire book, his deep yearning is to go like, I don't want to live the life. I don't want to live in poverty. His deepest yearning is to get out of poverty. And his self-pity is the thing that bars him from his deepest yearning all the way. So I give a whole other talk about identifying yearning, but understanding core transformation is that the narrator, the main character, the protagonist, which doesn't matter what point of view you're in, the protagonist is the main character, and the main character is defined by, this is the character who has the most opportunity for change. So not the one with the most exciting storyline. It's the one with the most opportunity for change.
Yes. And so, what do you think, why do you think writers kind of forget this when they're in the middle of writing it? Why do you think they forget to pay attention to that through line? Did it again.
Transformation. Let's just say transformation.
It's much easier to say for me.
Yeah. Because what happens is that, number one, we're readers. I've only had a few writer clients who've come in who weren't really readers, but we get lost in our love of stories and stuff. So when we're trying to make one, we're going to go for the things that rise up in us, right? So theme comes up, and beauty and poetry, right? And we get lost in that. And we think that the most interesting thing is the stuff that happens, but the stuff that happens is interesting because it matters. And the mattering is that story, that transformation at the core.
That driving force.
But we are not taught to look for transformation.
Oh, I agree.
think in the future, we're probably going to be taught to look for transformation, but not, I guess maybe not until I write my writer book about it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about when I was getting my BA and all the like English classes I took, a lot of the time they wanted us to write about theme, you know? And so when I didn't even hear about this transformation through line, you know, until I met you actually. But it makes sense.
We talk around it. Like, you know, lots of books talk about it, right? I mean, the situation and the story is talking about it, but it's that book is terrific. If you're writing a memoir, if you're a writer, you should read The Situation and the Story, but it is dry. It is a saltine cracker academic. It is so dry, but it has the information in there. The Art of Memoir, there's a chapter in there about it, but they're not quite as on it as I feel like I've gotten with this. We need to do transformation. Claire Dederer, who's the woman, she wrote Poser. And when this clicked for me is she was giving a talk and she was talking about this with different words, but she did use the term narrator A to narrator B. And I'm holding my hands up to go, they start here and they end here. So, and that's, I actually have my notes from that day where I had been going around and around and around. And then she said, my book Poser. And it was like Life in 28 Poses. And it's just about being a mom who starts doing yoga. And that's the book, right? But the book works because she starts off neurotic. And at the end, she is slightly less neurotic. And then the stuff that happens in between is setting up how she's neurotic, how she doesn't want to be, you know, what she really wants. And I can't get into all of that, but then through doing yoga and all these different, she does it by poses, she transforms to being less neurotic. She's a 90s mom. And if you know people that were mothers in the early 90s, there was this thing that happened where it was like everything had to be perfect. You couldn't have plastic in your house. You had to, you know, everything. It was like and that they were yelling at each other online constantly about which nipple to give them first and da da da. And it was this craze, right? She was exploring that world, but she was exploring it through a story. And the story was being neurotic to slightly less neurotic. And when she said that, I finally went, right? Like, oh my gosh. Then, like, I get it. I get that we need this kind of core transformation. And that's how I came to the transformation in my book, where I was like, oh, what I'm actually, doesn't matter whether there's the Alaskan wilderness and serial killers and volcanoes going off and an earthquake and a flood and a clown. All of that can fit in there if I truly understand my transformation.
Yes.
And my yearning.
All that can happen within the parameters of that.
Yes. And the more subtle the transformation, the bigger the story you can make. So when we think about epic books, right? I mean, if you look at Angela's Ashes, he like tells the story of his parents and going across the seas and being immigrants and then coming back, and then Ireland and, you know, the Depression, or like after, I guess it was the US and the Depression, I can't remember. There's so much going on, but he's actually just dealing with self-pity. He's grappling with well-earned self-pity because things were horrible. But he says it at the beginning of the book. And I just want to say, I know this, I can go on for days about this, and I'm trying really hard to not get off on other things.
Well, you've had a workshop about this too.
Yes. And we're going to announce, it might be announced by the time we do this, and we'll add a little thing in here that the workshop has a date and all of that. Looking at every character, the good books, every character has a transformation. I'm going to say it again. I'll hold the mic.
I don't know.
Every character has a transformation. I'm listening to, what's her name? I'm going to look at them. I listen to audiobooks now because I read so much for a living. I'm listening to Kate Quinn, which I keep thinking, Desi, that you should read, even though, because you read such like high literature. And then I'm like, you need to read spy novels. You need to read YA, right? Kate Quinn, who wrote, I'm reading The Rose Code right now. I'm almost finished, but I just listened to the Alice Network, and it's about women spies. It's historical fiction about women spies. And she does everything that you should do as a writer. And whether anybody's going to be snooty about whether it's going to win the Pulitzer Prize or not, she does what you're supposed to do. Every character starts off one way and ends up another way. And and she has multiple main characters that have transformations, and every single thing that happens, even though there's like 2 wars going on in each book, and they're traveling between different countries, and there's espionage, and there's loves, and there's all this stuff, it is all in service to the transformation of these characters. One transformation, right? Yes. One person is doesn't believe in themselves, and they are self-destructive and destructive to others because of not believing in themselves. And in the end, they kind of believe in themselves. That's it, right? One person, whatever. I don't want to go through all the characters and I haven't finished the Rose Code.
But she knows what she's doing.
Yes. And I would say all of us, like, if you want to write a story, step back and read the stories that you love and look for, and just write down what could be the transformation here.
Yes.
And I want to give one more trick, but I know I talk a lot, and I want to give you space if you want to say anything.
No, go for it. I'm loving it. One
trick that one of the things I do as a writing coach is that I think we've talked about this on other episodes. It's this, a reader isn't going to do this generously. They're going to do what a reader does is they are skeptical, and you're trying to get a reader to trust you, right? A good writing coach is generous in this thing where I think of myself as a little like hound dog. And the second I start reading a writer's work, I'm like sniffing for like, what are they going for? What are they trying to do? Are they doing what I think they're trying to do? And one of the ways that I help people figure out what their story is that I trust their endings. Even if that's not the ending that they end up with, because that's a whole other topic about, you can't really write the beginning until you've written the ending, and you can't really write the ending until you understand the transformation. But most people leave clues for themselves and where they think the story ends. So if you go to the end and you read, this person, what is the ending? And it's oftentimes we go, oh, if they end up here, then you reverse engineer the quote problem to the beginning, right? So if they end up less self-destructive, you can reverse engineer up to the beginning and be like, oh, you got to set up self-destructive so that you can get to the ending that you want. So for mine, I knew all along where I want my book to end. I'm not going to tell you because my book will come out at some point, but
gotta buy the book.
Yeah. But I mean, I can say that it was a moment that I looked into, and I was like, I realized that I truly become a nonviolent person, not a person acting as if, I had become a person who was no longer violent. And that was the ending. And I reverse engineered to go, I have been obsessed with nonviolence and violence my whole life. And when I reverse engineered it, I went, look, like I've been obsessed with this all along. And that the beginning of this book isn't just about survival and and breaking family cycles, because that's where you go. What's this book about? It's about breaking the family cycle of blah, blah, blah. That's a theme, right? Mm-hmm. So when I went to the beginning and went, having this really tough, wild childhood, coming from a family that has generations of horrific abuse, and being destined to become a person that my trauma was going to make me enact abuse because everybody around me. And then that act of becoming somebody who was like, I'm determined not to do this, but then realizing that it didn't happen when I thought it happened. I thought I became nonviolent when I got sober. And then when I started working with violent teenagers and I was helping them. And that is not where that true transformation came, because I learned about what violence was and I expanded my understanding of that topic. And so I have a definition of violence that is bigger than just somebody hits somebody or somebody says something mean, right? So that is the next thing. This is why it's a big topic, because then when you pick your transformation, you dive in and you go, what do I understand about this? What do I want to understand about this? And then what do I have to say about the process of transformation? And I would love, instead of saying plot, I say the process of transformation. Mm-hmm. And understanding that process. So you have a bunch of characters and they're doing a bunch of stuff, and you have written a whole bunch of rough drafts that you have spit shined into beauty, but they don't fit together. Go in and look at exactly what process. If you can understand your process, then you're going to understand structure. So I had to go in and really actually write out graphs and write out lists and describe, what do I have to say about violence? What do I have to say about the connection between trauma and becoming violent? Yes. And what do I have to say about the process of being somebody who was violent, who became nonviolent? And then when I went, oh, this is about X, Y, and Z. This is about denial. This is about deflection, denial. It's a lot about denial. I'll just tell you, it's so much about denial.
I love this because there's so many writers that are, like myself included, where I'm like, I don't know where this is going. Like I have an idea of where I want it to go. But you're saying basically start at the end and work your way forward, because once you know your ending, then everything is going to be in alignment with that.
Yeah. Or write wild and weird and get to know your characters and your world, and don't ask yourself at the beginning where this is going, unless you're going to do this whole other thing. There's pantsers and plotters, you know that, right?
Oh yeah.
So I'm talking about the process of pantsing. So write wildly and freely, write, and then step back and go, what is it that I did here? What was this? And then go to the end and go, can I reverse engineer it? Can I follow it back up to, I say the problem, because most of the time people forget to make it bad. If you want it to be good in the end, make it bad in the beginning, and make it bad in the same flavor group as the good in the end, So I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, like I see what you mean. Like when you're at a point where you've gotten to know all your characters and you just have a bunch of material and you're like, what is the structure of this? What am I going to do with this? That's when it's a good idea to go to the end and say, what do I want my ending to look like? What's the transformation?
Yeah. The other thing, what you started with in the beginning that I just want to point out is that every section is a transformation. Mm-hmm. Anything that ends up in the book is either feeding the need for the transformation and then transforming the person. It's either toward the problem or away from the problem, toward the devastation or toward the rehabilitation or, so understanding that everything is a transformation. You can open a book and just like, the mad scientist phase for me was super messy when I figured this out, because I was pulling books off the wall and I was opening in the middle. I have books that I haven't read. So I'd go to books I hadn't read and read one page and I'd be like, yep, I understand. I understand the transformation here, right?
Mm-hmm.
This person was this way in the beginning and now they're this way in the end, or in one paragraph. The other thing, which I want to do when I'm done with my, I mean, you know how many projects I have going, but one of my dreams is to do one of those, like, I'm going to plot out a story first. And so I'm just going to start with, I want to do a transformation about X to Y or A to B. I want to under this process, this thing. And then I put the story onto that like a hanger and let do it the opposite way. So that is a way to do it. I personally haven't done that as a memoirist. It's kind of a weird thing, you know, but I was thinking like someday when I'm done with the projects I'm on, I want to do like, write your book in 6 weeks. And I want to do it that way and just experiment with it. So if you're somebody who plots, you could be somebody that goes, I'm thinking about writing a book and then think it through, but that's not the real artisty wild way that we go about it.
The pantser way.
Yeah. And most people.
And for that, you got to read, Take Your Pants Off.
Yeah.
When it's time to do that, because that's great for outlining. You just fill it in. It's like a coloring book.
We will, when we start that part of the resource for writers, the craft book club.
Yes. That's going to have to be in there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the basics of the through line / transformation. I just want to say too, that the process of getting there and understanding this, like when I start with a group of people working on this, I have to steel myself to go, it's okay. They're going to be mad at you. It's okay. They're going to feel deeply misunderstood. And I don't see the art in their work. And I tell it to people because I'm like, we are going to argue. And the way you get to it is that you argue back and forth. Well, what about this? What about that? Right. I'm trying to think of, I can't say what happened in the group today because I did this talk in the group, but with like a whole bunch of props and stuff. And one person who worked with me and been through the workshop told me what they thought their transformation was. And we went back and forth. And they went, you're right. That's a theme. And she has been grappling with it for a year, but we get just completely stopped up with, it's a thing. It's a thing about our ego and our heart is in it, you know? And so I just like want to honor that is part of the process.
Yes. And I think too, because we know the characters so well, like we think it's obvious that this transformation is happening in this scene. And it's like, well, maybe it's just not coming through. Let's focus on how to make it come through better, you know?
Yeah. And it's easy to go, well, you just don't get it.
Yes.
And it's
too.
like, well, okay. And then
artist.
what I do with writers is I say, tell me exactly the transformation you're trying to illustrate here. And they're like, no, you just don't get it. And I'm like, okay, tell me what it is. And they don't know. But with the way that, I mean, I have right now is that with my advisor that I worked with for the last year of my program, he had me write a scene map, which then I revised to now I call it my manuscript map, where every single scene in my book has it is on this map, this list, and I have to justify how it feeds my transformation. Whoa. So every single thing where I go, this is about this part of this process. This is about this part of this process. And so he had it, he's a journalist. And he's writing other books. And then I brought in a whole bunch more, and we actually might be doing a workshop on structure, because I track out all the other aspects, like where I'm like, where's the yearning? How does the yearning play into this? How does the yearning of each main character play into this? What's the dilemma, which we haven't even talked about dilemma, which most stories in process are lacking, all of this stuff. So then when I go back in, now that I'm doing my like my final, I say that because it's like the final draft before I send it back to the agent, is that I go to my list first before I cut or move a scene at all. And I go, you know, what is happening with the bigger piece of the process? So understanding that makes a huge difference.
And how was your experience with that? Like, were there times where you had to cut some scenes and you did not want to because you're like, I still want this to be in my book?
Yes.
I guess.
I mean, he doing that scene map. I mean, we did a chapter map first, and then we did a scene map, and doing the chapter map where trying to get to what my book was actually about, which I want to be very transparent that it basically was me sitting in front of the faculty crying over and over and over again. And then just saying things like, I mean, this is cringy, I will say it. I just want to honor my brothers. I want to write a book that just shows the world how beautiful my brothers were. Yes. Which I know that's sweet, right? But it's not a fucking story. That's like, okay, fine. Go to his birthday party and make a speech, right?
Yeah.
Or I was like, well, it's about survival, and it's about the triumph over your family cycle of addiction and abuse. And then they'd be like, okay, but that's not a story. That's stuff.
And see, that sounds like a story to me.
It's not. it's a vignette. It's an interesting morsel, but it's not a story. It's not going to keep somebody going for pages. It's not going to have the aspects of an actual story. And people could argue, but I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I argued too hard to get to where I am, because I argued, you know, on your side, right? So if somebody wants to come argue with me, I'd be like, that was 6 years ago. I was arguing with the best, and they broke me down, and then I finally had to come to this. And I totally believe this now.
Yes.
At least understanding.
I think too, it's about training our minds to recognize when it is just a theme, you know, and when it's actually, this is the story, this is the transformation, you know?
Yes.
And that's going to take some work.
It does. It takes some work, and finding language that works for you. Like the woman that I co-taught the class with, my language didn't work perfectly for her. She understood what I'm talking about, but she offers up different language. So every one of those faculty it wasn't just faculty. It was Ellen, who was like, you need to go to an MFA. I'm a poet and you're trying to write prose. And she had been teaching forever. And she just went, yeah, you know, like, you're good at what I can do, but there's something missing here. And I argued with her for 5 years before trying to figure this out. It's making the unconscious conscious as a writer.
Right.
So it becomes scientific, kind of. It becomes an ingredient, and then you start to understand. And it does ruin books for you for a while.
Right. You're looking at it with a different lens.
I just see a readout now. It's like, it is like where I'm like, I watch movies. I go, oh, look, world building.
There it is. Yearning,
dilemma. We know their core transformation is going to be that they are, you know. Yes. And my friends, when I had back surgery and we would just lay around and watch movies, I talked about this with my friends who are not writers, and we would with 4 minutes in, they would stop and they go, okay, Roxanne, what's it about? And I'd go, look, they world build. They revealed their they revealed their yearning right there. Look, their core yearning is going to be this. Oh, look, this is going to be a story about this person, you know, like letting go, like whatever. It's hard to come to an actual transformation unless you have the thing in front of you. But then I would go, this, whatever, 4 seasons of this show about fairies in in whatever, New England in 1940 is actually going to be about prejudice and change and overcoming prejudice. This one character is about prejudice. This other character is about owning who they are and their self-identity. Their core yearning is this, and there's going to come a dilemma that places them between their core yearning is going to pull them in two directions.
Damn, there it is.
And watch 5 minutes of any movie and make yourself identify what are the clues what do they need to change.
Mm-hmm. See, I feel like I kind of see that with like Marvel movies, like that heroes, like first we're getting to know them and then we're getting introduced. And then it's just like that hero's journey, you know, they're not going to believe in themselves and then they're going to lose. And then wait, they're back, you know?
Yes. And you can, I don't like comics and I don't like comic movies. But I think that would be a good way to cut your teeth on it too, except for that comic. I think maybe I don't like the comic genres because I think the more subtle, the more tiny your transformation is, the more literary it is. Mm-hmm. So yes, it becomes nuanced, right? So then the tinier, the more like this to less this to more this, not violent to a freedom fighter. It's violent to slightly less violent, like that. And then that becomes a more literary.
For sure.
And so with comics, I think they rely a little bit too much on theme and not on actual transformation. But I don't know. I'm trying to think of the comics that I do know. Like Superman, does he change?
I think of it as more they're just trying to beat this villain. And so it's the story of them trying to overcome this villain in some way.
Yeah, but there's always something else. Like the villains always have a backstory, which they have a deep yearning and they have, and villains don't necessarily change. They just get thwarted. This is a big topic. I have to now think about it. Now I have to probably go watch comic movies.
Oh,
yeah.
I only do it because my boyfriend loves them. So I every now and then I'll peek over and check it out.
Yeah, so I did that and then I stopped dating men and I'm so glad.
Yeah, now you can watch the movies you want to watch.
I never have to watch that shit again. I did my time.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's a wrap.
Yes. Awesome. I'm going to go back to my writing and I'm going to start with the end.
Exactly. Or think about where you're like, yes, I'm going to end this story there. And then I want to say too, I know it's analytical and I know I said it's like hurtful and stuff, but it also is just like, I think of it as, the reason why I called the workshop, Find the Beating Heart of Your Story. It's a sweet action of coming down to just go, what is it? What is that tender beating heart at the center of what I want to say?
Yes. And
so to go about it with a kindness and a generosity, a ferocity, like ferociously going for it. But what it feels like when you're doing the work is that it's so analytical. And it is. And what you're doing is like trying to look so deeply into your that beautiful creative thing inside you. And that thing that when you write and you surprise yourself and you actually can go like, wow, like that's the reason why I write. When I went, that I made that beauty, like that discovery of what comes out of you as a human and all that. And at the basis of it, and I know I'll talk about this another time too, is that writers, artists in general, but writers are, we savor the human experience. And we are here to be so curious about the human experience. And that's what stories are.
Yes.
It's reveling in how many ways the human experience comes out. And that finding that core transformation is making it universal by making it deeply personal. So when you're going to your book, yes, go in with a keen eye and making it, intellectual, but do it too, to remember that what you're going for is to get your nose right into the heart of it. The sweetest, most vulnerable, hot, gooey mess in the middle of their story.
Yes. Love that. That's what we do.
Yes. Yes. And that's why as a writing teacher, it's why I love my job. It's why I get so excited that I can't stop talking. And it's why it's why I love being a counselor. It's this like being able to and being in a group with other writers. It's like why we go to conferences, why we do the thing. We can talk, we can say all this negative stuff, but being with somebody and just going, I am going to show up and be curious about this, your take on the human experience. I'm going to align with you to illuminate something that is beautiful and vulnerable. And even doesn't matter if somebody's not, they don't have to write memoir, right? I worked with somebody who wrote cowboy steampunk fiction, and that she would take cowboys and put them in steampunk stuff and take them to other planets, and where there was like talking snakes, and we were still dealing with this core beauty in her about the human experience.
Yes.
And that is like the coolest thing ever. That's why I love books, but I love writers more.
It's such an intimate thing too, right? Like to get into a writer's mind and see what they've poured out with their heart,
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a wrap.
All right.
Thank you all so much for coming to the Resource for Writers episode this week. And we're not knowing when we're going to start releasing these. So I think we'll just tag things on about what we're offering, right?
Yeah, as they come up.
Always sign up for our newsletter. You can find it at resourceforwriters.com. You can find me on social media. I have not been doing the Instagram, which I think you and I might need to talk about how to do that. But you can find us at Resource for Writers, at Resource for Writers on Instagram and on Facebook. My major social media is always spiritual_AF. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook.
Yes.
What about you, Desi?
And I'm on TikTok and Instagram at Desi_Lenc for both of those.
I just want to always put it out there. It's pronounced Lenc, but it's spelled Lenc.
Yes.
So people can find you.
Don't get it twisted. Lenc.
Yeah. Just like whenever, I don't know if you've listened to my, the Spiritual AF podcast, but if you can also find me at roxannemcdonald.com, but my name is spelled Roxan, like a chemical, Roxan.
Roxan. Yes.
I have to say it all the time because my parents fought about the spelling. So I got the least amount of letters, Roxan. But my name is Roxanne. So
yes.
Okay.
Put that out there.
That's a wrap.
All right. Bye. See you next time.
Bye.